built on the Mediterranean coast to create trading links with the rest of the ancient world. The later historian Arrian recorded that Alexander had laid out the city's general plan himself. But lacking chalk or other means, he resorted to marking it out with grain.
When a flock of birds began eating the grain, Alexander regarded this as a bad omen. Yet his religious advisor quickly spun bad news into good and interpreted this as a sign that the new city would soon prosper and would one day feed the whole world. A remarkably accurate prophecy.
For within a very few years, Alexandria would not only be Egypt's new capital, but the greatest city on earth. Although Alexander himself would never see it.
Yet despite his pious nature, Alexander was essentially a soldier. In his quest to conquer the Persian Empire, he left Egypt in 331 BC, never to return alive. Moving as far east as India, he conquered an empire of 2 million square miles before dying in Babylon, aged only 32, but still undefeated and still the Pharaoh of Egypt.
At death, Alexander was mummified, and his body became the focus of a power struggle. Some of his officers wanted him buried in his Greek homeland, but for others, he had to return to Egypt and be buried as a pharaoh, thereby preserving Egypt's long traditions. But it obviously meant that anyone who possessed his mummified body could also claim the throne of Egypt. And clues to this drama can be found here in the windswept desert of Saqqara.
10 years after he'd left Egypt alive, Alexander returned here, for his body had been mummified Egyptian style, and it became a hugely powerful talisman, for whoever held the body of Alexander the Great held Egypt.
While en route to Greece, his cortege was diverted and his mummified body brought here to Egypt's ancient necropolis of Saqqara. Exactly where his tomb itself was remains a mystery, although situated just metres from the Serapeum is this collection of very un-Egyptian looking statues.
And it's these somewhat sandblasted statues that give us a real clue that Alexander may initially have been buried somewhere close by.
Because these are the sculpted images of some of the greatest scholars and artists of ancient Greece. Although exactly who is who has kept academics scratching their heads for years, their likely identities reveal a direct link to the world in which Alexander grew up and was educated. Take Homer, for example. His great warrior hero Achilles was Alexander's lifelong role model. Plato, who had tutored Aristotle, who in turn had tutored Alexander. And Pindar, whose poetry had praised Alexander's Macedonian ancestors. As for who placed these statues here, the most likely candidate is Alexander's general and probable half-brother, Ptolemy. For by burying Alexander here, close to Egypt's ancient capital Memphis, Ptolemy could legitimise his own takeover of Egypt.
And by laying claim to Alexander's body and to Egypt, he founded the dynasty named after himself, the fabulous and outrageous Ptolemies.
Ruling Egypt for the last 3 centuries BC, the Ptolemaic dynasty would be Egypt's final flowering. 15 male kings all named Ptolemy, with their female co-rulers, half of whom were called Cleopatra. Macedonian Greek by descent, their dynasty would bring Greek style, culture, knowledge and fabulous wealth into Egypt, while at the same time immersing themselves in Egypt's irresistible religion and customs.
They were very, very sensitive to the cultural practices and the religious sensibilities of the Egyptians. They knew that to control this ancient land of Egypt, they had to tap into what made Egypt powerful, what made Egypt special. They wore the right clothes, the right crowns, they built the right temples, they worshipped the right gods.
And the Ptolemies relocated Egypt's capital from Memphis to their new super city, Alexandria. to Alexander's original plan, it was one of the most lavish construction projects on Earth.
The historian Strabo would later comment that the city had magnificent public precincts and royal palaces that covered a fourth or even a third of the entire area.
Egyptian annals once again depict a spectacular victory in which many sea peoples were slaughtered and others were captured and coerced into the Egyptian army and fleet or sold as slaves. Although Ramses III spared Egypt from invasion, the battle was so costly that the royal treasury was depleted and the tomb builders at Deir el-Medina could not be paid. This resulted in the first documented labor strike in history, in which workers walked off the job and refused to return until they were properly reimbursed. And then, the momentum of the Egyptian empire started to fade. Ramses III retained a powerful central authority, secured the borders, and kept Egypt prosperous. But the kingdom was crumbling around him. The office of the Pharaoh of Egypt no longer held the same level of reverence it once did because the priests of Amun served as an intermediary between the gods. Ramses III was injured in an assassination attempt staged by one of his lesser spouses and perished as a result of his injuries. Ramses IV, 1155 to 1149 BCE, ascended to the throne only after his elder siblings perished. He attempted to imitate the great pharaohs of the past and did complete several construction projects while battling to keep the empire's declining territory. But he perished after a brief rule. He was succeeded by his son, Ramses V, who fought to retain control against Amun's priests and keep the kingdom together. His successor, Ramses VI, carried on the fight with little success. Ramses VII replaced him, followed by Ramses VIII, about whom little is known, Ramses IX, Ramses X, and Ramses XI. All of these pharaohs fought to keep the kingdom together in the face of outside incursions and internal conflicts with Amun's priests. An incident related to these struggles, though obscure, involves a man called Amenhotep, high priest of Amun, who was deposed by the vizier Pinehazy and forced to escape south to Nubia. What we are sure about is that the priests of Amun retained huge power and reached the throne of Egypt and ruled the country. Smens, 1077 to 1051 BCE, a ruler of Lower Egypt who governed from Tanis, interred Ramses XI. Following the Egyptian custom, a monarch was buried by his successor, and Smens asserted his legal right to govern by relocating the capital from Per-Ramses to Tanis. However, by this time, the priests of Thebes had grown strong enough to assert their authority to rule, and the nation was divided between Tanis's control over Lower Egypt and Thebes's rule over Upper Egypt. Contrary to popular belief, this split did not end in civil conflict or internal strife. Smens was strong enough to be noticed, but he only controlled Lower Egypt, and not much of it. He governed around the same period of Thebes' high priest Herihor, who reigned from around 1080 to 1074 BCE. Herihor was a general of the troops, as were all Amun's high priests, but he had little impact outside of Thebes. This would be the dominant model for the majority of the Third Intermediate Era. Individual nomarchs were strengthened at the cost of either part of the central government, as in the First Intermediate Period, and both Tanis and Thebes failed to exercise any major influence over the nation as a whole.
But not before they're examined in detail by archaeologists. Thus, it's possible to reconstruct the appearance and the function of these structures. All Egyptian fortresses are built along the same lines. Yet the architects of the pharaohs know how to adapt each structure to conditions on site. The fortresses are surrounded by walls up to 10 meters thick and 15 meters high. There are no blind spots. No matter where attackers charge, the archers of the fortress can shower them with a hail of arrows. There are additional fortifications for the gate areas, the weak points of any fortress. Behind the walls are the quarters for officers and troops, as well as administrative buildings, temples, warehouses, and workshops. Since all fortresses have access to water, their garrisons can survive for a long time under siege. Yet, who are the men on duty in these fortifications? A wooden model from the Middle Kingdom shows a troop of Egyptian spearmen. The pharaoh's army mainly relies on professional soldiers, yet there's a considerable number of conscripts too. Basic training is harsh. First, the recruits' heads are shaven. Then the soldiers-to-be are drilled and trained in the use of their weapons. Physical training is a must. Wrestling is supposed to teach the recruits to stand their ground. Those who don't follow the rules risk a beating. A group of Nubian archers, enlisting warriors from the neighboring countries as mercenaries, is a common part of Egyptian rule.
Officially, foreigners were viewed with condescension. To Egyptians, especially those at the royal court, Egypt was the center of the world. In practice, however, things were quite different. Recent research shows that ancient Egyptian society was highly diverse, and a good many foreigners even made careers.
This also applies to the army. Yet it's doubtful whether service in a fortress will boost promotion. As soldiers report on papyri, daily life is monotonous. At least there's no lack of food. Off-duty, board games are a favorite pastime. There's no room for toilets in the barracks. The men have to make do with sand-filled bowls. So many soldiers must be counting the days until they're allowed to go home.
Duty in a fortress meant life in a very confined space in a very inhospitable area far from home. If you're a simple soldier, you're crammed into 38 or maybe 42 square meters with 8 to 10 comrades. That's certainly a hard life. If you are a commander or a senior officer, then even if your fortress may be comparatively small, you'd still have a large building and all amenities at your disposal.
Archaeological evidence shows there's a huge difference in the Egyptian army between a small elite of officers and the enlisted men. Written sources, nearly 4,000 years old, tell us what daily life was like in the fortresses. The Semna dispatches. They're accounts of Egyptian patrols in Nubia. From their fort, the soldiers move into the surrounding countryside of the Semna Gorge for reconnaissance, checking everyone they come across. The patrols keep a special eye on Nubian traders who want to enter Egyptian territory. Only those holding a permit are allowed across the border into the empire. The fortresses on the edge of the Egyptian world are meant to uphold order, not just against armed enemies, but also against the supposed chaos of the outside world. The Egyptians also marked their territory with stelae made of stone. For a long time, this border system works. Yet around 1800 BC, the Middle Kingdom collapses, its defenses crumble. Egypt lies open to foreign invaders and learns its lesson.